What's up guys, it's Lord Both here for another video, and it seems across the gaming industry, jobs are being cut by developers. I mean, just last week we were getting this story about Crystal Dynamics, the Tomb Raider developer, cutting jobs in their own company. But while many developers seem to be cutting jobs, CD Projekt is actually adding to them. This comes to us from PC Gamer, and it's entitled The Witcher 4 and Cyberpunk 2 development teams continue to grow as CD Projekt's headcount expands to nearly 800. And yes, they do put the caveat here, 2 years after laying off 9% of its workforce, CD Projekt is building up again. And the article states that a chart released as part of the H1 reports, that's the financial reports, indicates that The Witcher 4, which had 422 people working on it as of April 30, is up to 444 people at the end of July. Cyberpunk 2 has seen comparable growth, growing from 96 people at the end of April to 116 people as of July 31st. All of CD Projekt's teams have grown, in fact, including those working on the Witcher spin-off codenamed Sirius, and an even more mysterious Hadar, which is an entirely new thing. Quote, our recruitment efforts have significantly sped up over the last 3 months, and as a result, the total number of talented developers working across our projects has grown by 10%, reaching almost 800 people, CD Projekt joint CEO Michael Nowakowski said in an investor presentation. This growth was primarily driven by our 2 largest development teams. He also continued, we anticipate further gradual growth in our total developer headcount by the end of the year, particularly for teams working on projects in the most advanced stages of production, i.e. Witcher 4. So they're going to add more people onto these teams, which means they're probably going to scratch over 1,000 people working at the company again. The article continues, it's quite a turnaround from just 2 years ago when CD Projekt announced plans to lay off around 100 people, representing roughly 9% of its workforce as part of an organizational update aimed at making teams that are more agile and more effective. That's a roundabout way of saying we didn't make enough money on the projects as we thought to justify continuing keeping our workers on. So we had to let them go, only to bring them back a few years later to work on new projects. And this seems like a cycle that we're going to go through continuously now, turning hired employee developers into contract workers, essentially. Because as the article states up here, for some random comparison, The Witcher 3's internal development team had around 240 people on it, while 400 people were banging away on Cyberpunk 2077 a half year before it was released. So there's more people on both games working on their respective sequels. Couple of things there. One, if they cut people after those games out with that amount of people, what makes you think they're not going to cut jobs when the sequel games come out if they have more people working on the sequels? Especially if the games don't do well, which I have a fairly certain feeling I don't think they're actually going to do that well. I think surprisingly, Cyberpunk's sequel might actually do better than Witcher 4. The idea of a Witcher 4 where you play as Ciri originally around the time Witcher 3 was first out, had a lot of hype to it. But many different things have changed since then, and created an environment where a Witcher 4 where you play as Ciri has grown increasingly undesirable. And it seems the more we see and more we hear about the development of Witcher 4, the less hype the game seems to have. And I think it will continue that downward trend unless we are shown something absolutely spectacular in terms of gameplay or even cinematics, because remember the trailer that they released for Witcher 4, it wasn't actually even a trailer because none of it was in-game footage. It was all just CGI mock-up of what they think and hope The Witcher 4 will look like. And if you remember the old original trailers for Witcher 3, the CGI trailers, they didn't look like anything like the finished game, which was almost a positive thing because I think the finished game actually looked and functioned better than what we might have gotten with those cinematic CGI trailers. Another thing is people seem to think that if you have more people working on the sequel to the game, especially if it, didn't actually deliver on what was promised and didn't necessarily launch well and function well, a la Cyberpunk 2077, maybe having more people actually working on the sequel will make it better. To that, I would say that's not necessarily true. It might mean that the development actually might be on schedule and things can be developed faster, but it doesn't necessarily ensure quality. Especially seeing to the effect that a lot of the devs that worked on Witcher 3 are now gone. And they've developed Rebel Wolves Studio that's creating the one vampire game that I always forget the name of. Blood of the Dawnwalker, I think is what it's called. So yes, those were the developers that actually delivered on quality of Witcher 3. So who knows what the actual quality of Witcher 4 is going to be. Though, to be perfectly honest, those were also the same developers, a lot of them, that worked on Cyberpunk 2077, which of course was a disaster at launch. And they were the same developers that lied continuously about all the features that were going to be included in Cyberpunk 2077 that to this day are not there. In fact, because of those developers, I would argue that CD Projekt has developed a bit of a reputation of overpromising and underdelivering. A reputation they did not have when they released something like The Witcher 3, which was probably good, because if they did have that reputation and that problem before Witcher 3, they would have probably came out and said something like Ciri was going to be able to transform into a dragon and have fights with massive armies or some shit. So it was probably best for the game that they weren't like that initially. Which also gives me a bit of concern with Rebel Wolves' game and what we're actually going to get of the finished product, which the boys seem a little bit too hyped for. I think we need to tone it down till we see more gameplay footage from that actual game. We also have to take into account that growing headcount also means growing expense to a game. So I would assume that these games are going to be premium prices. So expect at least $80 games, which is the unfortunate state of where we are right now. Because, as the article states here, don't expect either of them to show up anytime soon, though. The Witcher 4 may be out in 2027, but could be even later, while development timelines for the studio's previous games mean Cyberpunk 2 might not show up until late 2030 at the soonest. So we're not going to get Cyberpunk 2 until 2030 at the soonest. I wouldn't be surprised if that thing doesn't come out for a decade. I'll be in my 40s by the time Cyberpunk 2 comes out. Generation-defining titles used to mean that the game was really good and defined a generation of gaming. It didn't mean that it got one title every generation. It also means long development time means a lot of money being spent, which increases expenses, which then get put on to the consumer. So again, expect an expensive game, which I think overall, especially with the economy being as it is right now, maybe it will change and get better in 5 to 10 years, doubtful, is going to hurt sales probably in some way. And all this ultimately means that CD Projekt Red is probably going to be in a bad financial state when these games release. And if they do not release to great success, it might not spell the end of the company, but it would be pretty dang close. And you can definitely expect that jobs are going to be cut either way, especially if they expect jobs to balloon even more with the development of these games. But hey, those are just my thoughts on all this. If you have your own thoughts, go and leave them in the comments. If you liked this video, go and like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like this video, appreciate you watching all of it, and we'll talk to you again later.